Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I work for VNRC as a restoration ecologist, and in that position, about 60% of my job is managing dam removal projects and trying to support watershed organizations to take on more dam removal projects, identifying projects, prioritizing them, and then separately from that, but also related, I get to work on clean water policy at the state level to improve the health of Vermont's rivers. So it's a really exciting sort of two-part job, and a lot of what I do on the ground translates to what I get to do at the State House. In my work on dam removal, I manage the Vermont Dam Task Force, which is a group of interested citizens, scientists, and regulators that all come together to support dam removal work and share problems, hurdles, identify projects, and stay up to date on current science. We also manage the Free Vermont Rivers website, which is in the slide here, and I encourage anyone to go who wants to learn more about dam removal to check out the website. There's a dam mapper that shows all the different dam removal projects that are going on in the state. So we try and keep it current, and there's lots of good information there. But what's most exciting about my job is assisting in the process of recovering an ecosystem that has been damaged. And with these dam removal projects, that damage can be up to 100 to 300 years of having a fragmented system that's, this man-made concrete barrier that's blocking a river and blocking the natural functions of a river. So it's quite rewarding to work on taking those barriers out and reconnecting systems. This started way before my time. I've only been in this position for 4 years, but through a grant through the Lake Champlain Basin, we created something called the Vermont Dam Removal Initiative. And that initiative, the Dam Task Force was formed out of that, but it was to raise awareness of these derelict dams across the state, to identify them, prioritize them, and then collaborate as a task force. And in Vermont, since we've been doing this work, we've physically removed 72 dams. So we removed another 6 dams this summer, which was really exciting. Went from 66 to 72. And American Rivers said that Vermont alone has removed more dams per capita than any other state. So that's a pretty exciting claim to fame. To understand the benefits of dam removal, so I'm sort of going to talk this presentation about the science related to river systems and understanding that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the dam removal process and then go into some just different projects that I'm working on. And Lindsay, feel free to, if I'm taking up too much time, give me a nudge. Keep track of time for me. But a fundamental part of understanding watershed ecology is understanding that rivers exist in 4 dimensions. And this concept, I think, is pretty basic, but it's amazing how people are very fascinated when they learn about this. But there's this lateral dimension to a river, that rivers are 4-dimensional, and the lateral dimension is giving a river room to access its floodplains. So during high flow events, rivers need to be able to come out onto their floodplain to slow the flow, attenuate flooding. So that's that lateral access, that's the lateral dimension. The vertical dimension is the connection of a river to its groundwater, to its wetlands, its spring seeps, and it's that exchange of water, chemicals, and organisms that is really important to feed rivers, to keep them cold. Vermont's known for our cold rivers. To have those cold rivers, we have to have that connection of our headwaters and our wetlands to our rivers. A lot of people, if you're experienced fishermen and you're walking rivers, you can walk a river and suddenly you feel a really cold spot. That's that groundwater surface water connection. That's that vertical dimension. The longitudinal dimension is up and down transport of a river system. So rivers move, aquatic organisms move up and down them, sediment moves down that system, nutrients move down that system. So Having a dam in a river blocks that longitudinal connection. It can block that vertical connection. It can isolate the river from its wetland. It can block that lateral connection. And then temporal is giving a river space to move over time. Rivers are dynamic, and they respond and evolve perpetually, and forming new channels, abandoning old ones, building islands, riffles, pools. And so part of river science is understanding that rivers change, and we have to be accepting of that fact. This diagram is really helpful to also look at how a dam impacts a river. This is something called the river continuum concept, and it's this idea that a river, a free-flowing river system, is dependent on biota, flow, and habitat. And when you block that system, you impact that transport of biota, flow, and habitat. And what you have behind a dam is warmer water, and that water builds up over time. The sediment, the substrate changes because the sediment can't move down the river, so it builds up behind that dam. And the ecosystem changes. So instead of a brook trout fishery, you have bass and sunfish. You have different plant species that are going to accumulate. You have mussels, different mussel varieties that are going to colonize behind a dam. So really having a dam in a system changes that system from a free-flowing river to a lake-like system. And on top of that, there's the cost of maintaining the dam, the liability to the dam owner, and the potential impact if that dam were to fail to neighbors downstream. So there's a huge public safety element to having these dams as well. This image just shows the bathtub effect, which is that same idea of having a dam that buildup behind that dam warms up that water. Sort of an extreme picture, but you get the idea of that temperature change. That substrate we talked about, the fragmentation of that longitudinal connection of the river, and the potential for invasive species to be introduced. That last picture in that last slide showed some long-nosed gar that are blocked at the Swanton Dam. So they're spawning there. I was there last May and just happened to look down, and there's over hundreds of gar below the dam spawning, and it was kind of a cool picture. And so the benefits of dam removal is reconnecting that thermal refugia for species that are dependent river species. We talk about brook trout. Brook trout is definitely the key species that has a lot of funding, but wood turtle is just as important. Sturgeon as well. A lot of our salamander species, our spring salamanders, are really important. So it's providing them with improved opportunity to access habitat and cold water refugia during those warmer months. And also improved genetic resilience because they can connect with other populations for spawning. And that ultimately gives them longer term resilience. And both to these species, wildlife species, and human species as well, because we have a restored connection to our floodplain, because we have removed that barrier that blocks that longitudinal and lateral connection, which then allows our river to potentially go out onto its floodplain during storm events and to connect to cold water, to keep the water clean because that temperature is lowering, the dissolved oxygen is increasing. So it's ultimately improving the resilience of the waterway itself. Another way that I like to think about these projects is thinking about the evolution of the watershed. Yes, the history of the dam is super important for communities, and there's a great amount of connection there as far as European colonization history. But for 13,000 years before that, the Native American peoples who lived on the land had a connected waterway that they used for travel and sustenance. So the history really started a long time before the actual dam itself. So thinking about that piece of the river's history. And then, so this is just an example of a dam that we removed this year in Salisbury. But in the 1790s, it was a sawmill. And then it became a mill for sleighs and blacksmith shop in the 1820s. And then it was abandoned and used as a trout pond by a landowner in the 1900s. And then it became owned by the Lake Dunmore Creamery and was used again for hydropower to keep the milk cold. And then the landowner that's lived there since 1926 chose to remove the dam and reconnect the river for the benefit of the wild trout population downstream. And the history, the little quote on the right just shows how this was a local historic book for the town of Salisbury, but just shows how they're talking about the river and the benefits of the river as a resource. And they identify the powerful spring seeps on this tributary, on this watershed, and the benefits of them as a resource. And just thinking about that evolution to me is a really great story. Going a bit into the dam removal process, I love to think of it as 10 simple steps. It's a lot more complicated than that, but it starts with project selection, and then, we develop support, we fundraise, we move into design, permitting, outreach. From outreach, we go back into developing more support, more fundraising for the next stage, ultimately with removal, restoration, and potentially monitoring. And all of this takes a lot of time. So I'm just going to dive into a few of those little pieces. For project selection, we're all of these projects, depending on our funding opportunities, are prioritized for different things. So we have a funding bucket for water quality. We have a funding bucket for fish passage, and we have a funding bucket for flood resilience and hazard mitigation. And sometimes all of our projects meet all of those criteria. Sometimes they meet one more than another. So it's looking at projects and looking at all of their ecological benefits as well as public safety benefits, and then prioritizing them based on that. The hazard potential rating of the dam itself also plays into this. Owner interest, for sure. We can have the highest ecological priority dam removal with a significant or high hazard rating, but if the owner's not supportive of dam removal, we can't do anything. And then partner support, because the more partners we have with these projects, the more the community is on board, the stronger the project's going to be. And this picture, I love this picture because it just shows a dam that we've taken out. We're looking upstream, down where that truck is in the image is where the dam was. But you can see this floodplain that was underwater. It was a pond before, and now we have this area, this space that we're planting trees on, that the river during a storm event can now jump the bank and slow down and absorb the water. Partner support is huge for these projects, and there's just so many partners, and I think some of the hardest work is gaining that support of the community and all of the partners, but also the most important work. So all I can say is these are just some of the partners for one project, but there's a lot of partners out there, and it's just really important to work hard to gain the support. The fundraising piece is super complicated, and I'm not going to get into details, and I'm sure some of you know about this, but what I will say is post-2023 storm flood events, there was a ton of urgency for this work. There was, I think, at least 6 dam failures across the state, and my phone was ringing more than ever with people who suddenly have connected the dots that the dam in their backyard they don't want anymore, and they don't want the liability for it, and they want it removed as soon as possible. Unfortunately, these projects take years and the funding takes a lot of time, so I can't make that happen as soon as possible, but I can help them and support the project or help find a watershed organization that's willing to do that. So there's a huge amount of urgency now, and it's, I think, a combination of the climate change, the increase in storm events, and also the aging infrastructure of when these dams were created. The engineering and restoration design is a long process, and there's different stages depending on how the funding works, which funding you're working with, and the complexity of the project. But it's typically broken down into like a feasibility phase. A design phase could be 1 part, 2 part, or 3 parts, depending on the complexity. So we could go from 30 to 60% design to final design, and then ultimately permitting and construction. There's not enough, what I can say is that there's not enough engineering firms with the experience in this. So there is a bottleneck with the amount of projects we have to move forward and the amount of engineers who have the interest and the skill set to do this. So it is a little bit of a niche thing, and we're working on training more engineers to do this work and raising capacity. So that's really important. And then all of that comes together. We're 2 years in approximately to a project, or 3 or 10, and we get to the big yellow machines, heavy equipment, removing the sediment, and removing the dam, which is really exciting part. And it is a huge disturbance. It looks messy. People driving by are like, what is happening? There's an excavator in the river. The contractors are freaking out because they've never done this. They don't know, you know, this is against all the permits known out there. But it's a disturbance for a long-term benefit, and it's crazy how quickly that benefit is recognized on the landscape. Like literally, we saw fish moving up this dam after we notched it within an hour. Like these fish hadn't been able to move up this dam for 300 years, but there they go. So really exciting part of the project, and definitely why I do it. It's very rewarding very quickly. And then I'm just gonna quickly wrap up so there's time for questions, but go over a few different projects that I've worked on since I've worked for VNRC. This is a similar picture of that dam floodplain that I showed you earlier, but this is Dunkley Pond Dam that was removed in 2021. It's within the city of Rutland on Tenney Brook. So if you're ever driving down Route 7 in Rutland, you'll see a sign right on the highway that talks about the history of the dam. But again, this one was a hockey pond, a swimming pond, a mill. So a long history of the dam. And then there was 8 different flood storm events that caused evacuation of the 3 different multi-home houses along the river. And the fire department was pretty upset just by the stress that that caused. In the 2019, there was a Halloween storm event that actually was so bad that they actually breached the dam while they were evacuating people. And following that breach, there was no flooding issues, but we did need to fully remove the dam to reconnect the river. And so we came in to do that work. But the city was very grateful to have this dam removed and the river free flowing. Pelletier Dam, this is a dam in Castleton that we removed. This one was on Vermont Fish and Wildlife owned land. And this is just sort of interesting because it's the story of like Vermont Fish and Wildlife buying a dam, which was an old marble dam that had a historic use as a mill, but and wanting to turn the pond into like a fishing area. Unfortunately, the bond never worked out because it was full of sediment from not being an active dam anymore, and just filled up more with sediment and became a large wetland because of this dam, man-made wetland. And so they recognized that this brook actually was an amazing trout fishery downstream and upstream of this dam. So the benefit was far more to reconnect the river. And this removal reconnected 37 miles of fish passage. So a big fish passage project. And then this is a little headwater dam, an earthen dam. These were promoted by NRCS back in the day. I think they would pay for you to build one of these on your property for water supply for wildlife or for agricultural purposes. This one was 300 feet long. You can see the outlet where these trees are is actually the earthen dam. And we had to do an emergency drawdown of this dam because of all the trees growing on the earthen dam, it was failing, and there was a house and a road below. So we did an emergency drawdown to release the water from behind the dam, and then this beautiful wetland popped up with all of this groundwater. So this headwater seep wetland, you can see the groundwater coming in. Ultimately, we removed the dam itself and restored the river, but it was just so cool to see that wetland that's been suffocated by water as a pond for so many years pop up and actually be active on this dam. And then the dam we removed this year, Wainwright Mill Dam, which I spoke to earlier in Salisbury, was a dam that had been there for 300 years, and we reconnected it. This one was kind of unique in that we actually built beaver dam so this had a ton of beaver habitat behind the dam. And when we removed the dam to help control some of the fine sediment that's releasing behind that dam, we built beaver dam analogs and strategic wood additions, 8 of them. And so we're monitoring them over time, but it was really cool to be a part of that restoration piece and really encourage the beaver habitat. And almost last, Cross Brothers Dam in Northfield. This is one that we're working on coming out. The engineering design for this shows that by removing this dam, we'll lower the flood elevation by 2 feet for 10 homes. And these are homes that have flooded in the past. So we're changing the flood mapping for the town of Northfield. And it's a tremendous economic benefit to remove one dam for $1 million and lower the flood elevation for 10 homes, than to pay from a FEMA buyout to remove just one home with a FEMA buyout is about $400,000. So definitely this is a better option for the community. So it's getting a lot of support. And then Lindsay's probably shared with you, but the 2 dams in your area roughly is Sleeper Pond Dam is an active dam removal project in Newport Center, and Trout Brook Dam in Berkshire, which the Franklin County Conservation District is working on. So these are just photos of those projects. And lastly, the restoration outcomes of these projects are reconnected rivers, which allows for increased species resilience, diversity, and habitat, restoring natural stream process, reconnecting hydrology, vegetation, and soils. Reconnecting rivers allows for improved wetlands and floodplain access, improved water quality, public safety, and removing that liability, increasing recreational opportunities, and providing community outreach and education. I think there's a tremendous amount of improved understanding of how rivers function, which shouldn't be as complicated as it's amazing to me how a lot of people just haven't learned about that because they don't spend enough time in their backyard. And then this work provides support for local watershed organizations. So these projects provide direct support for those organizations, and that's really important as well. So with that, I'll leave it to questions. These are my children. We like to go visit dams and fish below them and take pictures. So I will stop sharing my screen as soon as I can find that button. Thank you. I hope I didn't go over too much.
No, that was great. Thank you, Karina. That was really fun. And I mean, it's been great to work with you as we've dipped our toes in the water with Sleeper Pond Dam, but just that succinct presentation was really wonderful. And now I want to bring you back and make you do it a lot more. So thank you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Do folks have questions for Karina?
I do. Yeah, sorry. My name is Guy, and I'm curious, specifically about the dams on the Missisquoi River. I know you mentioned a couple one in Berkshire and Newport, but what is the future of those dams? Can you talk about that specifically? What sort of time period are we looking at for getting those dams removed, or is it not happening because of other reasons?
You're speaking of the two that I mentioned, Sleeper Pond and Trout Brook, or other dams?
Other dams on the Missisquoi, like starting with Swanton and then moving up.
Okay. I think that's a really good question, and I put that back on the community, but maybe not all of the communities that represent those dams are here. So obviously there's the FERC licensed dams, so the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which would be Highgate Falls, Enosburg Falls, and what's the one above? There's another one there.
Sheldon.
Yes.
Boy.
Those are up for, well, they're coming up for relicensing right now. We're in that stage right now. So part of my job is to provide comments to improve Vermont water, to make sure that those dams are meeting Vermont water quality standards. And they only come up for relicensing every 30 to 50 years. So it's definitely an opportunity to make sure things are working to the best of our ability. And with Highgate is the only peaking dam still, Highgate Falls, which has a tremendous impact on the Missisquoi. So we're, part of the comments that we've provided is to reduce that peaking capacity of that dam and improve the fluctuate. There's a huge fluctuation now with peaking of the water levels. And then the town of Swanton also owns Lower Swanton Dam, which is an inactive derelict dam, which has been considered. So yes, that's a dam that is, would be a good candidate for removal. It's the highest ecological priority dam removal in the state from past studies, but it hasn't gotten support because the community is attached to it, and then they have recently submitted an application to restore hydropower at that dam.
Okay.
So we've been following that and providing comments accordingly.
So a follow-up question on these dams. What about fish ladders and to have a constant flow so wildlife can get up and down the dams without being blocked? Is that a possibility? It's sort of as an interim. If those dams are going to be there for another 30 to 50 years, can we do something in the meantime to get the flow happening?
It's an option, and part of the Highgate Falls relicensing has proposed look at, as one of their mitigation measures at Highgate Falls, they have proposed to look into fish passage at Lower Swanton. But then concurrently an application for Lower Swanton to be relicensed for hydropower has also come in. I will just say that fish passage is really hard to obtain, and it's very species specific. So maybe it improves passage for one species, but it's really hard to have fish passage for sturgeon, which the Lower Missisquoi is known for sturgeon habitat. Sturgeon are a bottom feeder, so they would need like a very mellow incline. So salmon is one thing, sturgeon is another. Eel is another one that's really hard to find fish passage for. So yes, you can provide fish passage for something, but you're not going to provide it for everything, nor are you going to restore that stream function of sediment nutrients moving up and down a system that is really what a river needs to function. So yeah, it's a small improvement. The cost of it is insane, and it's not a great fix, but it's something, and it's something we're open to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. So what do you find to be the biggest reasons that a community would push back on removing a dam? Are there certain ones that just, reasons that always pop up over and over?
I think that's a really good question. Yeah, I find it's the connection to the history of the dam, and That's the most reoccurring one. The history of the dam, the sound of the waterfall, and the attachment to the pond. And not every dam is a pond, but many of them are. And we don't have a lot of natural ponds in Vermont, so those are important places for folks for recreation.
So do you find that there's certain ways you can address those to make people think about things in a different way so that they're not so attached to the sound of the waterfall or the pond or
Yeah, I do. And it's, with some of these projects that have been priorities for VNRC and many for a long time, the progress has been slow. And it's really the strongest when someone in the community can be the lead because VNRC is a state voice. We're out of Montpelier. We don't have the connection to a community that you might have in the community. So when those voices can be come from the community and we can find those liaisons, that's the strongest. I think community visioning exercises where the community comes together to identify their priorities and, record those and share those is a really valuable way to start of like, what is the river in your backyard and how do you feel about it? Just some ideas.
thank you.
Can you say more about the beaver work that you did, that you described on one of those projects?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask, well, if you remove dams, you probably don't like beavers, and that's not the case. We love beavers. Beaver dams are really different than man-made concrete dams. They fail all the time. They're designed to fail. They do not block fish passage. So huge lover of beavers, just say that. And they've been in a lot of our dam removal projects and they do not seem to be bothered by the dam removal project. They literally we will be putting sandbags up to shift the stream while the excavators are working. And then at night, the beavers will build onto the sandbags. We come back in the day and so it's literally they're working the night shift and we're working the day shift. And they seem to adjust just fine to our presence. The beaver dam analogs and post-assisted logs that we installed were really an effort to control sediment release because the state was concerned about fine sediments just moving downstream on this tributary to the Otter Creek. So they mimic beaver dams and we tied them into existing beaver dams. So there's beaver dams upstream. There's 5 beaver dams. So our control was a beaver dam. And then we built 8 more beaver dams downstream, which hopefully the beavers will build onto. But they're designed to be temporary structures that just help retain habitat as the river's adjusting. Trout Unlimited is really a supportive, and they took the lead on that piece. So they're the experts.
I have another question. Go ahead.
I was just going to list the dams that we have. There's the Swanton, the Highgate, which is a hydropower producing. It's pretty good sized, and then Enosburg, then North Troy, and the Chase Dam in Troy, and then I'm not positive about maybe Lowell might be Warner, but I haven't seen that. So that's the list on the Missisquoi. Go ahead, Wendy.
Well, does somebody else want a question? Because I already asked one. The diagram you had of the dam right above the town, how would you, it was right above the town, so how would you remove that and not wipe out the town? Do you know the one I mean?
Yeah, I do. Where underneath I had a link to an article, Unstable Dam Has Town on Edge. I took that graphic from online. So, I mean, I can't speak specifically for that graphic, but I know that there are many dams like that. We have a dam removal that we're working on in Williamstown on the Stevens branch, which is above the town of Williamstown, and it failed during the 2023 storm and caused a ton of damage to the town of Williamstown. So the dam actually failed, which basically meant the dam overtopped, and then we had to lower it by 4 feet to and dewater it. So there's like a pump around now constantly, and now we're going to take out that dam. So that was after some impact had already occurred to the town of Williamstown, but you can dewater these dams, so send water around
Right.
to avoid impacts.
If anybody's interested, check out the news on the Oroville Dam in California. It was, I'm going to say 10 years ago, it was basically blowing out on the side on its flood chute and completely destroyed the flood chute. And there's I think if my memory is right, a town of 11,000 or so, basically right below that dam. Oroville, California.
Yeah, that's a good example.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Thanks for your presentation. I noticed you talked about some of the history of some of the dams. Like, how much time do you spend diving into the history, what the different purposes are, and how relevant is that to your proposals?
It's relevant because it's regulated. We have to do that. And I personally like very interested and I read all of it, but I hire a historic preservation consultant and archaeologist to do that work. So someone who specializes in that. And that's required as part of our Section 106 compliance with the Clean Water Act. So through the Army Corps of Engineers permitting, through our federal permitting, we're required to do that. And I think it's great because it documents the history where it may have not been documented because no one had to do that before. And in most cases in Vermont, the Vermont Department of Historic Preservation is very supportive of dam removal. So they aren't telling us that we can't take this piece of history away. They just want it documented for their files. And often they'll also, if it's a public facing site, they'll ask for a sign and we'll work with them to build a sign, which is a really nice way to retain that story. And also, we will take, like we took marble slabs from the dam and used them and created a bench next to the sign. So we like to take pieces of it and sort of build something that memorializes it. So I love the history. I think the history is a great story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any last questions for Karina? All right. Well, thanks again, Karina. That was great. And like I said, I'll be in touch to get you to do more of it.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for what you guys do, and I would love to. I can't listen in tonight because I do have to go home and feed my kids, but I would love to learn more about UMATR. And I was telling Lindsay that I was asked to be on the Deerfield Wild and Scenic Committee, which is forming as we speak. So I'm going to be doing something similar to what you all do and look forward to learning from you guys. So I'm sure I will reach out in the future. And thank you for your good work.